Hi, with this episode of How We Got Here, I thought we would look at borders and immigration. With over 1 million immigrants coming into America every year, did you know that borders are God's idea? Deuteronomy 32:28 said, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of men, he set the boundaries of the people. And then when Israel came into the promised land, God gave them borders. Exodus 23:31, I will fix your boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates. No other nation had borders given to it before they even entered. And so God himself set up borders, and he distinguished between peoples and languages and ethnicities. And even in the book of Revelation, it says, in heaven, there will be believers from all peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations. The earliest borders are mentioned in the Bible as well. When Laban was chasing Jacob and they set up a pillar at Mizpah and made a treaty that one would not cross over that area to do harm to the other. Joshua sent the scouts into the promised land and they came back with descriptions of the area, and he set the borders for the 12 different tribes. And these borders were fulfilled during the reign of David. And then David was tempted to go on an offensive military campaign, and God convicted him not to. This was talked about in when he took a census. Kings would take censuses to see how big their armies were before they were going to go on an offensive campaign. In other words, David was being tempted to be Alexander the Great 7 centuries before Alexander the Great. And God said, no, you're not going to be an offensive nation. I gave you borders. Stick to them. And God even said in Deuteronomy that when his people would sin, he would allow the borders to be overrun. And Deuteronomy 28, if you do not hearken to the voice of the Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. A people that you do not know will eat your land and labor produce. Foreigners who reside among you will rise above you higher and higher. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away. They will devour your livestock and so forth. And then the Lord will scatter you among the nations. And that's what happened in 721 BC. The king of Assyria overran Israel's borders because they had sinned so much, and he had them taken away and scattered, the 10 lost tribes. And then Judah in 597 BC, because of their sin, Nebuchadnezzar had his armies overrun Judah's borders, and they were taken away captive. King Cyrus of Persia let them go back and rebuild, but then in 70 AD, the Romans overran the borders, and the Jews were scattered for 1900 years. The Roman borders. Now, Hadrian, you probably know him from putting down the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 AD. And what's the Bar Kokhba revolt? Well, the Jews were rebelling against the Roman Empire, and Hadrian decided enough, he was going to exterminate the Jews, literally wipe them out and destroy, hunt down every descendant of David and kill them and just wipe them out. And then Hadrian went on to build the Hadrian's Wall. And no sooner did it get built than it began to be overrun. And so the Roman borders were being overrun. Little history here. China builds the Great Wall of China over several centuries and several sections. But finally, by the 4th century AD, they'd completed enough of the Great Wall of China so that the Huns and Mongols could no longer overrun the Chinese border. And the Huns turned west and started a domino effect of displaced tribes, attacking one, then that one would move and attack the next and attack the next. And they began to overrun the Roman borders. This was called the migration period, 100 to 500 AD. And at first, they would come across slow and assimilate the Visigoths, and they would learn the language and learn the culture and rise up and even join the military and become generals. But then they came faster and faster, and they did not see the need to assimilate. And one of the instances was in 406 AD. On December 31st, the Rhine River froze. The Rhine River was the border of the Roman Empire. And so thousands of Germanic invaders crossed over and nobody drove them out. And more crossed over and more crossed over. And then they began to attack. And you began to see that weakness invites aggression. So if you show a little weakness, more come. If you show a little bit more weakness, they'll come in greater numbers. Finally, they'll attack. And so you had the Anglos and Saxons and Visigoths and Ostrogoths and Jutes and Lombards and Berbers and Suebi and Alans and the Vandals. That was actually the name of a tribe, the Vandals. And then the Huns, led by Attila. And Rome was finally sacked in 476 AD. Will and Ariel Durant wrote in The Story of Civilization, 1944, if Rome had not engulfed so many men of alien blood in so brief a time, if she had passed all these newcomers through her schools instead of her slums, if she had treated them as men with 100 potential excellencies, if she had occasionally closed her gates to let assimilation catch up with infiltration, she might have gained new racial and literary vitality from the infusion and might have remained a Roman Rome, the voice and citadel of the West. In other words, think of how much food you eat in a year. Imagine if I were to sit you down and make you eat it all in a day. You need food, but if you eat it that fast, you would die, right? You only eat food as fast as your body can assimilate it. So America needs immigrants. We need the labor. We need the innovative ideas. But the prudent policy would be to bring them in as fast as they can be assimilated. We've even seen this in schools. You'll have a Christian school, and you'll bring in non-Christians. Maybe the parents want their kids to maybe rub shoulders with Christians and then hopefully become a Christian. But if you have too many non-Christians come into the schools, guess what? They end up changing the whole demographic, and they end up pressuring the good kids to do bad things. Now, America's borders. You had the colonial era, and the Appalachian Mountain Range was the border between French America and British America. And then the British and French fought with the French and Indian Wars. And when the French lost, borders became the Ohio River and the Mississippi River between British America and the Louisiana Territory. After the Revolutionary War, the Treaty of Paris set more borders for America, particularly between America and British Canada. And then the War of 1812 set more boundaries, and the Mexican-American War, 1848, the Gadsden Purchase, where we bought some land in Arizona and New Mexico to allow for a transcontinental railroad. But really, when you look back, there were no limits to immigration into America, other than for health reasons, cholera epidemics, or for a while there was an anti-Catholic sentiment that wanted to stop Catholic immigration from Ireland. There was an Irish potato famine, and millions of Irish Catholics fled, and there was a backlash to that, and it finally settled down. But other than that, there were no limits to immigration. Why? Because each new wave of immigrants, German, Irish, Jewish, Polish, Italian, Chinese, provided cheap labor, right? They came in at the bottom of the social and economic ladder, and they didn't know the language and they didn't know what trades, and so they would work for very inexpensively. And so anybody could start a business. You could go down to the port and hire some people and give them a job, and they would learn the language and learn how the business works, and then they would live together and pool their money and their resources. And guess what? They would start a business, and then they would send their kids to school, and then they would accumulate wealth and pool their resources, and they would make contributions to society, and then they would get involved in politics, and they would overcome racial and stereotypes and discrimination by becoming successful and rising in public respect. And so every new wave of immigrants was pushing everybody else up the economic ladder by providing the inexpensive labor and so forth. And so immigrants were welcome. And this was the path that Booker T. Washington encouraged for the freed slaves. After the Civil War, he started the National Negro Business League, stating, "No man who continues to add something to the material and intellectual and moral well-being of the place in which he lives is left without proper reward." Booker T. Washington said, I want to see my race live in such a high and useful lives that they will not merely be tolerated, but they shall be needed and wanted. He added, anyone can seek a job, but it requires a person of rare ability to create a job. What we should do in our schools is turn out fewer job seekers and more job creators. Now, once welfare programs were implemented and immigrants would come over and immediately sign up for welfare, they were a net minus. So before, every immigrant was a net plus. They would immediately be able to add to the economy by working and so forth. But once you change it to a welfare system, they come over and sign up, they're an immediate drain on the taxpayer in the city, in the state, in the federal budgets. And so this is where we begin to see a political immigration. After World War II, the Soviet Union wanted to destabilize these new countries in Europe and in the Middle East and in India. And so it was called the Cloward-Piven strategy. Richard Cloward, Francis Piven were socialist professors at Columbia University in New York. And they said it's too difficult to take over all these countries with tanks. You can do it easier through the back door. In other words, you get as many people to sign up for welfare. You destabilize the economy. You intentionally cause inflation. When people struggle, they sign up for welfare. And once they're on welfare, you got them. Why? Because they will always vote for those that give them money. It's a sort of a human, if somebody's giving you free money, you sort of want it to continue. And then they would let these immigrants come in and sign them up for welfare and have them keep their own identity and not let them assimilate. This way they could be used in this critical race theory of dividing into groups of victims and oppressors. And then you can cause division, and then division will destabilize the country, and then they could do their riots and finally overthrow the leader and replace him with a Soviet puppet. Country after country after country was falling to this during the Cold War period. Now in America, we focus on Lyndon Johnson. He's the one who did the big welfare switch. It's called the Great Society Welfare State. And he realized that they were losing a voter base. The immigrants would come over, work hard, and then they would vote for candidates who would take away as little of their hard-earned work as possible. But he noticed that if you could bring them over and sign them up for welfare. And so in 1965, Lyndon Johnson and Edward Kennedy changed the immigration quotas and immediately began enrolling immigrants in welfare programs, helped by liberal churches who got kickbacks from the government. And then they would end up voting for the candidate of the party that continues the entitlements. And so one has to ask a question. If every immigrant coming into America was going to be a Republican voter, would the Democrat administration continue to let them come in at the rate that they're coming in? Just a thought. Well, one idea would be possibly to scale back welfare programs and let families and churches be the ones to provide the welfare, right? The extended family and the churches, and then adjust the rate of immigration to the rate of assimilation. Well, hope this brief examination of borders and immigration has been insightful, and pray that the Lord bless you.